Coming up, a conversation with Christopher Mitchell, candidate for Colorado Springs mayor.
This is 6035 Media.
Casting an informed vote is your right and your duty as a citizen. I'm Brian Grossman, Executive Editor of Sixty35.
And I'm Shelley Roars, spokesperson for the League of Women Voters of the Pikes Peak Region.
We're teaming up to bring you conversations with the candidates in the April 2023 Colorado Springs city election. So this interview is both an episode of the new 6035 Vote podcast
And the League's Making Democracy Work podcast. So let's get to it. So Christopher, why don't you tell us just a little bit about yourself and why you're running for office?
Okay, well, to give you a little bit of background, I've been here in Colorado Springs since 1998. Moved here from Aurora. Started off in Aurora as an electrical engineer, and then I moved down here and have continued in the same career for the last 27 years. I've been very active in community service, especially after the Waldo Canyon fire. I was involved with providing volunteer engineering services to the residents of Mountain Shadows, and also working with what was called Colorado Springs Together, which was a kind of a nonprofit volunteer function for helping residents with debris collection and just getting them back on their feet. And that's where I've really had my beginnings in community service. And over the years, I've grown more and more involved in the community of Colorado Springs. I want to preserve Colorado Springs in its fundamental sense of being a great place to live with respect to outdoor activities. But with our growth, we also have to balance that with our need to make it welcoming to new people moving here.
Great. Thank you.
All right. Christopher, I'll get into some specific questions. First one is, where do you stand on the 128% water rule and extending water and other utilities to flagpole annex developments? This is the water rule that City Council just determined within the past couple weeks.
Okay, I did a little bit of research on that topic recently, and I think it's very important that as we grow, we have to take a conservationist standpoint on natural resources, and water is one of those. And as an engineer, I believe in critical planning or strategic planning as you endeavor into a project, which in this case, an annexation. You have to be basically making sure all your ducks are in a row. And this is just, once again, a great way of making sure that we are conserving water and that we're not building out so fast that we're overcoming our capacity to provide the basic utilities. But water is something where reservoirs and other facilities have to be constructed prior to annexations in order to reassure that we can have the fundamentals in place. And as an engineer, I find that it's important to have what I call pre-planning for projects. And this is what I call a pre-planning type modality that is being introduced. And I'm speaking more in terms of engineering in this case. But I find that as we grow, it's just reassuring us that we wouldn't become a metro area such like for, say, Phoenix, Arizona, which has grown. And they're now saying, wow, we've grown so large that we don't have enough water to sustain what we have, and then also to maintain for the future generations that we're going to have stability in the natural resources. And water is definitely one of those. But then also open space conservation is another one that I'm very big on. As we grow, we need to think about conserving the open space and, say, even the trees, because if you really look at it, water retention in the landscape is really based upon vegetation and other factors that are, quote, anti-drought factors.
And water aside, any opinion on how the city goes about annexing today?
I'm a firm believer in that one policy that I feel should be implemented as we grow is that we're annexing a lot of going east, if we want to go east, developers should have impact fees imposed on them. That if developers want to be part of the process of growing the city, they need to have impact fees imposed on them, not only for infrastructure development, but for watershed development and the natural resources to which we just referred, because that is part of what I feel is a responsibility for the developers. And moving forward, we need to be more of a community that we want to grow, but the developers need to have there needs to be an implication made that the developers need to participate in a monetary sense in order to have a part in that growth, not just breeze into town, say we want to build something, and then have CSU or another entity foot the bill for the growth. The developers need to ante up.
Okay. Thank you, Christopher. Shelley?
My question also about water. We spend a lot of water on what we call wastewater landscaping, 78%. That's about the roughest estimate lately, that whether it's the resort with a broken sprinkler system that just lets it go for a day or two, or the golf course down the street, right? That pretty young. And I'm a realtor, I get curb appeal. But what I also don't get is my neighbor planting Kentucky bluegrass either. So, and that's kind of the gamut of big business and even the small little residential neighborhood kind of, because we all waste water. How can we do better there? And then also, should the city consider extending water and other utilities to those subdivisions that are located outside the city that might not ever be annexed as part of being a regional water provider?
Okay, first of all, I will address the one about the water conservation. Is the situation I have seen many, many times, especially I live over off of Garden of the Gods and 30th Street. So I can drive down the street in the early morning and there's sprinklers just shooting up rockets of water out of and that goes on for weeks on end.
Correct.
And the property managers, property owners need to be held accountable for that. They need to be brought into quicker turn times on getting the sprinklers fixed. I know that sounds a little bit, authoritarian, but it is something that we need to take into account. My particular residence, I have a large yard. It was a 1984 build, so the yard is a little bit larger than, say, on a newer build. And I have a just grass backyard. And so I'm very familiar with the challenges of, quote, one, keeping it up to healthy during the summertime, but also being a conservationist, how much is enough that your lawn isn't like so always just like plush green in times of water conservation. There has to be a balance, that we can't just have a never-ending for the more traditional lawns and landscapes. Probably we need to regulate a little bit more on how much, what it actually constitutes green enough or maintenance enough on those lawns, because especially with larger properties where the lawns are huge, it just seems that we need to have a little bit more regulation on how much they're using and how much they're being charged for that, so they are more participant. And with the newer builds, yards are traditionally now becoming more xeriscaped. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a good policy to drive toward smaller lawns that are, quote, needing maintained with water.
We live on the same side of town, so I feel your pain with regards to those sprinklers just shooting in directions that are not even getting grass.
Yes,
so,
they're watering. They're giving cars a car wash rather than
they sure
watering the lawn.
Right.
And then with regard to what you were talking about, extending utilities to unannexed areas, this is somewhat of a delicate issue for me, because I believe that CSU and its mission needs to focus on a jurisdiction. And that jurisdiction is defined by where it's getting its funding from, in terms of if you are part of the city, you're in the jurisdiction of providing funding to CSU, and either through taxes or some revenue. And CSU traditionally flies under a banner of kind of a nonprofit, but they still get their money. They get money from its customers, but also taxes to keep the machine running. And so I think that extending it out to what I call the non-city jurisdictions or areas, I don't want to get into a situation where the residents of Colorado Springs are footing the bill for non-participant funders.
Okay.
You know what? I guess that's the best way
Yes,
I would
sir.
put it as an engineer.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you. Right.
Christopher, how do you feel about accessory dwelling units being allowed in single-family residential areas?
So when you're saying accessory, are you talking about, say, something that was not in the original intent of the master plan?
ADUs tend to be like the mother-in-law cottage, but often used for commercial reasons like Airbnbs. Some use it for extended family, others use it to make more money. But it would be essentially that accessory unit on your personal property that you would be able to use how you wish.
Okay, so I think I will answer this from experience. I have a friend who has a large backyard and has decided to build another
There you go. That would
unit
be
in
that
their
would be an
backyard.
ADU.
And I would say that as long as there's an adherence to the code for that region or that area, and also that they are, and the building department is saying it's all within conformity,
Right.
I think that person should have a right that if they have a property and they can leverage an economic benefit from that property, I think they should be able to. I think there would be a limit, however, as to the extent of that in the reviewing process. I don't know if this exists in the planning department. I'd have to look it up or even investigate it. But I would feel that if that was becoming more and more common, that the planning department should adopt additional criteria which would go to, say, through the approval process. So we don't want to get into what I call a de facto standard, that if it became more and more common, I would like to avoid de facto standards and go for an official standard within the planning and approving process.
Okay. Overall, though, you're in favor of allowing those?
I would say that as long as like I said, it's really a case by case, looking at the zoning for the area. And I would say that as long as a person is willing to leverage their property and for economic benefit, I would be I kind of look at it as a business proposition as long as it's within the confines of the regulations for that area.
Gotcha. Okay. Thanks, Shelley.
So also along the lines of housing, right? We've got a affordable housing issue and an affordable housing attainability issue. It's not just about, it's even whether or not somebody can attain, whether they can attain that dream, get there, whatever that looks like. How do you propose to address our affordable housing and affordable housing attainability crisis?
Okay, it's a very good topic because it's at the forefront of Colorado Springs growth. It really is. It's the main driver, is affordable housing. But I subscribe to a little bit different belief that you have to have stability in housing before you can have affordability. And I'll explain what I mean by that. And this is a very, I guess, personal view and not necessarily an adopted political view, but it's just something I have convictions about, is that in order to have affordability, you have to have stability. And as our city is growing, we're growing in a very erratic way. There's a lot of things happening over there versus over here, like on this side of town versus the other side of town, and they're disjointed. And when I say stability, is to first look at the bigger picture of, as things are moving through the planning department and the planning commission for recommendation to city council, we need to have a more comprehensive tying together of all these different growth aspects of the city for stability's sake. And then you can start kind of bringing those together in terms of the different aspects of growth to a stable process where it's all connected rather than disjointed. And then you can start working on what I call affordability, because stability comes first in my mind. As an engineer, stability comes first, and then you can start looking at stabilize your design, stabilize your project goals, and then you can start working on the budgetary, how it all fits together. So I take a little different view than just, I don't agree with the sense that we just build more things, housing products, in order to address affordability. We have to look at a more comprehensive view, but that comprehensive view is going to look at different income brackets and how we can best build the new products in the city limits for affordability.
Okay, thank you.
Christopher, public safety. Colorado Springs Police Department is short anywhere from 50 to 100 officers from its authorized strength. The homicide rate last year was the highest it's been in the city. Traffic fatalities were the highest. What do we do about public safety in the police department?
Okay, for example, one thing that I've noticed with just police in general is that in order to, first of all, address recruitment goals and shortfalls in that area, is we need to promote a positive image both internally and externally to the department. In other words, the officers that are serving need to know that they're appreciated and that they're serving a very vital function to the community. And then also, they need to have what I call occupational safety. I mean, we're starting to deal with fentanyl instances where police officers go into convulsions because they're exposed to some drug element. And so we need to make sure that they have the right equipment for their occupational safety. And these are very basic tenets. And then one other thing that I would like to do is start addressing the recruitment process in terms of, I have a personal friend of mine who would like to go into the police department, and he says, well, there's barriers that he feels that if they had a different program for people like me or a different pathway in, then I would be proved to be a great officer. And so he's kind of voiced to me that says there's certain barriers to the recruitment from his perspective as wanting to be part of that. But I feel that we have to address the basic tenets of the occupational safety and the fact that they need to be affirmed and supported both from a funding standpoint and just for the what I call the moral support from the community and the mayor's office, that they are the chief, they're it flows down from the mayor of law enforcement, that they are the ones doing the work and putting themselves on the line. And then I also would look at, in terms of the community, I have what I call a sense of we need to address the gang violence in the certain parts of the city, and we need to address the homelessness issue. And those are all tied in a way to law enforcement, but not completely. But there's an element of law enforcement in every one of those I just mentioned. So it just comes down to, we need to have laws enforced, but we need to have, and the police having the right tools to do it. But we also need to make sure that, like I said, they have the soft skills, the occupational safety mechanism in place for the challenges that they're facing. And that all kind of wraps back to funding levels. Okay.
So you mentioned support and equipment as being sort of the two main things. Do you think that's missing right now, that they're not supported and they're not being equipped like they should be?
I wouldn't say that they're not being supported, but I would say they're being faced with new challenges.
Okay.
And we saw that here recently, where we had certain events in the city where people are being shot in basically by open shooters and things like that. And we see more and more in the news that we're dealing with shootings. And that's becoming an increasing, whether it be mass shootings or just isolated shootings, but we still need to get a handle on that. And there's just, with growth, that only increases. And one of the things that really I want to work for in terms of public safety in general is better coverage. Because as our city grows, the coverage of these services of police and fire get diluted. And as we grow, that's another aspect of our growth that we need to be taking into account in a more comprehensive view to make sure that we have the right kind of coverage levels that are adequate for reducing response times on fire and police, but also making sure they have the right equipment, and all that goes back to funding levels.
Okay. Thank you. Shelley?
Sure. So you mentioned in your last response as well, probably the police responding to homeless issues, whatever they get in, not necessarily a police issue, right? How do we address the homeless? How would you, as the next mayor, address that homeless issue we have?
Okay, well, homelessness is a two-pronged issue for me. It's one, as mayor, part of my job will be to be a chief law enforcer. Through the police. Okay, I'm enforcing the city has laws, and these are the laws. But when it comes to this issue, we also have to have a redemptive path. And so there's an element of law enforcement, and there's an element of providing a redemptive path for individuals who are homeless. And so that's kind of where and I'll kind of expound upon that. For example, homelessness is something that is a law enforcement issue if the person is breaking the law, sleeping or occupying private property or things, and then also there's unsanitary conditions, which are a public health issue. And so those are all law enforcement issues in terms of dealing with the fact that as mayor I have to run a city and I have to enforce the existing laws. Occupying the medians and panhandling is against the law for Colorado Springs, so that needs to be enforced. But we can't just round up everybody who's breaking these laws as a homeless person and then just put them somewhere. They have to have a redemptive path forward. And as mayor, I would envision that redemptive path being the city working with the community groups to find redemptive paths. Now, some of these people are willfully homeless. Some of these people are mentally not well, and so that they're homeless for various reasons. And so on a case-by-case basis, we need to find that redemptive path, not just law enforce, but we have to find a redemptive path for these people.
Great. Thank you, sir.
Christopher, if you're elected mayor, do you foresee any tax increases or fee increases? New fees, increased fees?
I will say that I will be a candidate who I will not do what George H.W. Bush did.
Read my lips?
Yeah, I will not do that. Okay, I won't because I will be completely candid. As an engineer, I know that any project that I would face as an engineer always has caveats. I would be, say, working down the road as a project manager, and then we have budgetary challenges where we're going to have to ask for more money to get something done. And as mayor, that will be no different. And so it will be more I would like to avoid tax increases if all possible, but I'm also a realist that says that there's going to be times when critical functions of the city may be needing a tax increase and need to be reviewed for a tax increase. So I'm not going to make a promise that I won't ask for some more tax money, but I will say that my guiding principle is fiscal responsibility and accountability in government. So that would be the overarching lens or filter through which I would look at on a case-by-case basis whether or not we need to raise taxes for a particular function.
Okay. Running short on time. Shelley, you want to ask your last two there?
My last two.
All right.
Got you. So a couple things that are league specific, right? you'll get a candidate forum thing for Vote 411, which is our basic questions that we ask you about your platform and whatnot and why you're running for office. But these are very league specific. One, what are your thoughts on raising city council pay to a reasonable amount to be inclusive of others who do not have the ability to do that job as their only job, like a retiree? So $6,250 is what current city council members get. And again, as the league, we do not oppose or support candidates, but there are issues that we do take stances on. This is one of those. We've been for raising city council pay for quite a while, so curious as to what your thoughts are there. And then thoughts on moving our spring municipal elections to the fall. Probably, we turn right back around in the fall and do school board elections, right? And so what are your thoughts on moving it to the fall to help increase voter turnout and save the city $600,000 per year?
Okay, well, those are some good questions. For the first one, I have a personal friend who wanted to run for city council, and she said, I can't do it because I have a day job and I won't be able to afford to take the time off and all that. And then she says the pay is chump change. And that was just, I'm quoting her. Mm-hmm. And so I feel that the city council job as the city has grown is becoming more and more inclusive of, it's more inclusive of many functions. One of them is being liaison to the airport, or having somebody who is working some certain issue, and so that takes time. And I think they should be paid more, to answer your question in short.
Perfect, thank you.
Because the increasing responsibilities with a growing city.
Okay.
And then the last question, basically, it all comes down to this. Can you repeat the question?
Yes, moving spring elections, right? The one you're going through
Yes.
right now, the city council mayor's race, moving them from the spring to the fall to help increase voter turnout and save the city $600,000 per year.
Well, as somebody who was out getting petitions in the cold weather, I would be like, yes,
Right?
let's do that. I know that sounds a little bit funny rationale, but for the sake of saving money, I think it would be best to coordinate the two. And then campaigning during the warm months is so much easier, and it's actually funner.
Right?
And so I would love to save the city some money and have more time to be outside, maybe out having outdoor events while I'm campaigning.
Mm-hmm. Good. Thank you so much. Appreciate you.
All right. Christopher, we're just about out of time. Do you want to take a couple minutes here to close us out and remind voters why they should vote for you?
Yes, I am running for mayor because I am running as the non-politician politician. I'm coming from the engineering world, the professional career world, if you will, and I have a deep love for Colorado Springs. And as we grow, I want us to grow to be not only a city of champions, but a city of the future. And I want to bring balance and I would say a different viewpoint to city government is that I'm coming from like basically the average resident who really cares about the city, and I am very competent in my skills that I have as an engineer, but to extend those to mayor, some people would ask, I don't see that, but actually I've been a project manager and I love building teams. I love managing departments, and I love managing money. So producing a budget for city council to review, and we can wrangle on that budget. I would love the opportunity to do that for this city.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Christopher, for your time. We appreciate it. You've been watching or listening to a joint podcast effort by Sixty35 Media and the League of Women Voters of the Pikes Peak Region.
Be sure to follow Making Democracy Work and check out lwvppr.org for more information regarding our candidate forums in March.
And stick with us here at 6035 Vote to make sure your vote is an informed one. This podcast is produced by Dave Gardner. Video is directed by Nick Raven. I'm Brian Grossman, Executive Editor.
And I'm Shelley Rohrs, spokesperson for the League of Women Voters of the Pikes Peak Region. See you next time.
Hi, I'm Dave Gardner.
And I'm Nick Raven.
We're the podcast producers here at 6035 Media.
6035 Vote is just one of a growing family of hyperlocal podcasts that we're creating.
And these are for you, someone who wants to engage fully in your community.
We've got the 6035, which is a quick, lively recap of the top news stories of the week.
It's my favorite. It's really great and often funny.
I love having you as a guest, actually.
I do too.
And then we have Hot Takes and Streaming Breaks, which is a potpourri of news and commentary about movies, gaming, TV, streaming, and just so much more. It's for the youthful at heart, and, that could be anyone, really.
Yeah, I'm surprised I even really enjoy it because Nick hosts that, and he's witty.
Well, and the cool thing is that you can watch both of these podcasts on YouTube.
Or you can listen to them on the go in your favorite podcast app.
And there's a couple more, but you can also visit 6035media.org/podcast to see them, browse them, sample them.
And then subscribe to the ones that you like.
And then subscribe to this YouTube channel.
Yeah. And if you really love it all, like we do, you can just subscribe to the 6035 Podcast Network podcast, which is a conglomeration of all the episodes, all the brilliance and humor that emanates from the studio.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of it. So like and subscribe today and go listen to them all or watch them.
What he said. Good. Thanks.
Got it?
That wasn't so painful.